They said, "You're too old for this, Grandma. Just stay here." I watched them pack the car, each movement hurried, as if there was no room left for me in their plans. The kids' laughter, light and carefree, echoed through the open windows as they drove off. Greece was waiting for them. The beaches, the seafood, the promise of freedom. And I was left behind, like an old coat they no longer needed. I didn't argue. I didn't ask why. I just stood there, still, my hand raised in an empty wave as the car disappeared down the road. The silence that followed felt like a weight I couldn't shake. It wasn't just the house that was empty, it was me. For the first time in a long while, I felt invisible. They told me to water the plants and double-lock the doors, like I was just another part of the house that could be left behind. "You're too old for long flights, Grandma. Just stay here." That's what they said as they packed the kids into the back of the car, slammed the door shut, and drove off with the sound of their laughter drifting through the open window. They were heading to Greece. The beaches, the seafood. They didn't even see me standing there on the porch, watching them go, not a single glance in my direction. I didn't say anything. I didn't ask why. I just waved. And when the door closed behind me, it was like the whole house let out a sigh, as if it, too, had been waiting for me to leave. I stood there for a while, my hands still raised in the air, fingers stiffening in the silence. The street felt too empty, too quiet. The next morning, I found the plane tickets in my mailbox. They weren't meant for me, of course, but there they were, still in the travel agency envelope, unsent, unstamped. Departure in 3 days. Athens, 2 adults, 2 children, their seats together. Not a word about me. Of course it wasn't. I stared at the tickets for what felt like a full minute. Not angry, just surprised. Surprised by the audacity, I guess. I didn't know what to feel, so I made tea. That's what you do when life punches you in the chest. You make tea, and you wait for your hands to stop trembling. Only they didn't. They kept shaking as I reached for the phone. I found the number for the travel agency in my old address book, the one I hardly used anymore. "I'd like to cancel these tickets," I told the girl on the other end. She sounded surprised. "Can I ask why, ma'am?" "No," I said. "Just cancel them." There was a long pause before she said, "Of course." I scribbled down the confirmation number, then set the pen down. I looked around at the house, at the photo of Paul on the mantel, young and smiling, still with me. But that was 20 years ago now. If he were here, he wouldn't have let this happen. And that was when it hit me. I wasn't just going to sit here and wait for them to send me a postcard. I wasn't going to stay behind this time. The next morning, I went out to get the mail like I always do. I had no real reason to hurry, but my feet moved a little faster than usual. Maybe because the house felt too empty without the sound of them coming and going, or maybe because I knew something was off. I took the key from my pocket, unlocked the mailbox, and pulled out the usual bills and junk. I was just about to turn back inside when I saw the travel agency envelope, thick and white, sticking out from the pile. At first, I thought it was just another flyer, another one of those promotional things that come in a glossy envelope, promising discounts and deals that were never really for people like me. But no, this was different. It had my name on it. Helen Adams. I held it for a moment, unsure what to think. It wasn't for me, I knew that. The last time I went anywhere on a plane, it was with Paul, 20 years ago. That trip to Florida. I haven't even thought about flying since, not once. I never needed to. But there it was, this envelope with my name, my address, the kind of thing that usually gets lost in the shuffle of life. I walked back into the house, still holding the envelope. The door closed behind me with a soft click. The house seemed quieter than usual, like it was waiting for something to happen. The stillness pressed against me, and I wondered how long it had been since I felt like I was really here, since I was really seen. I sat at the kitchen table, the envelope still in my hands. It was one of those thick, textured envelopes that always felt important, like it came from somewhere official. Somewhere that had business with you, whether you wanted it or not. I sliced it open carefully, my hands shaking a little, the way they do when something's just a little too much to handle at once. Inside, there were 2 plane tickets, a small brochure. Their names, David, Laura, and the kids, were printed in bold letters. Athens, Greece, departure in 3 days. I stared at the tickets, blinking. I read the details over and over, trying to make sense of it. Athens, 2 adults, 2 children, seats together. My name wasn't on it. Of course it wasn't. They had already made their plans, their decisions. It was done. I wasn't a part of it. Not in any real way. Not anymore. I sat there for a long time, just staring at the tickets, the silence of the house wrapping itself around me. It wasn't anger I felt. It wasn't even hurt. Not exactly. It was something else. A sort of resignation, I guess. Maybe it had been coming for years. The way they'd stopped asking. The way they'd assumed I was fine with staying behind. After all, what would they have done with me on a trip like that? I was too old. Too fragile. Too much of a hassle. But I wasn't fragile. I wasn't someone who had outlived her usefulness. I didn't need them to tell me what I could or couldn't do. This was my life too. I don't know how long I sat there, my fingers trembling around the edges of the envelope. Maybe it was 10 minutes, maybe an hour. But eventually, I stood up. I walked to the kitchen counter, opened the drawer where I keep my old address book, and pulled it out. The edges of the pages were curled from years of use, the ink fading on some of the names and numbers. I wasn't sure why I still kept it. I don't call anyone anymore. It's just one of those things you do without thinking. I found the number for the travel agency. I dialed it slowly, listening to the ringing on the other end. When the line clicked and a voice answered, I had to pause for a second before speaking. "I'd like to cancel these tickets," I said, trying to sound steady. My voice sounded different than I expected, like I wasn't really sure if this was what I wanted to do, or if I was just saying the words to feel like I had control of something for the first time in a long while. The girl on the other end of the line hesitated. "Can I ask why, ma'am?" I almost told her it wasn't any of her business. Instead, I just said, "No, just cancel them." There was another long pause. I could hear the sound of her typing. Then, almost too politely, she said, "Of course. I'll take care of that for you." She gave me a confirmation number, and I wrote it down without thinking, the pen shaking in my hand. The call ended. I stood there in the kitchen, the phone still in my hand, the confirmation number written down on a piece of scrap paper. The weight of it didn't sink in immediately, but when I looked at the tickets again, I knew something had changed. I had made a decision, something small, maybe, but big for me. I didn't care if they called. I didn't care if they were upset. I wasn't going to wait behind anymore. I wasn't just a part of the background. I wasn't just the one who stayed home, who didn't matter as much as everyone else. I was me. I walked over to the window and looked out at the street. It was a quiet morning, the kind of stillness that makes everything feel like it's holding its breath. I thought about what they would say when they found out. Probably nothing. Maybe they'd text me some photos of the beach, some message that said, "Wish you were here." But they didn't really mean it, did they? They never meant it. They just assumed I'd always be here, that I'd always stay behind. But I wasn't staying behind anymore. I turned away from the window, a small smile on my lips. It felt almost silly, but it felt good too. I wasn't sure where I was going yet, but I knew it would be somewhere that didn't involve waiting in the background, somewhere where I could still be me. And that was enough. The house was still, too still. I moved through it, not in a hurry, just pacing, my feet light against the hardwood floors. It had been that way for a while now. This quiet, the absence of their voices, the silence that had settled like dust over everything, the absence of purpose. At first, it was a relief, almost. No one to ask for things. No one to remind me that I was there, but not really there. No more being asked to fix what didn't need fixing. No more silent expectations that I'd just play my role as the invisible background. The house had always known I was there, just like they did. But now, in the quiet, it felt different. It was no longer a relief. It was suffocating. I'd spent so many years in the background, waiting for them to need me, waiting for the moments when I would be seen, when I would be asked. But the truth was, I had never been asked. Not really. I walked past the mantel where Paul's picture sat, still young, still smiling. He had been gone for 20 years now, but it felt like yesterday. He wouldn't have let this happen. If he were still here, if he hadn't passed so suddenly, he would have seen me. He would have heard me when I said I didn't want to just be the one who stayed behind, the one who was forgotten when things got busy. I walked into the kitchen and stood by the window, staring out at the garden I had kept alive for years. The same flowers, the same roses, the same vegetables, all planted and cared for, with a little water and a lot of patience. It felt like a metaphor for my life, that garden. I had nurtured it, tended to it, but I never really got anything back, not in the way I needed. You're too old to travel. Just stay home. Those words kept playing in my mind like a broken record, the sound of their dismissive kindness echoing through my thoughts. At first, I'd agreed with them, almost out of habit. I wasn't that old. But the truth was, I wasn't too old for anything. They thought they were doing me a favor, treating me like I couldn't keep up, like I couldn't handle something as simple as a plane ride. But they didn't understand. They never understood. It had started so quietly, this change. First, it was the little things, the phone calls that never came, the visits that grew fewer and farther between. Then, the trips, the family vacations I used to be a part of, the ones I used to help plan, to save for. I'd always been a part of that. I made the meals, packed the bags, arranged the hotels, made sure the kids had enough snacks for the road. And then, one day, I wasn't needed for that anymore. One day, I was just the one who stayed behind, the one who looked after the house, the one who was too tired to keep up. But I wasn't tired. I wasn't weak. I wasn't fragile. I hadn't even been asked. I moved to the desk in the corner where I kept a small stack of papers and old photographs. I don't know why I still kept them. Old receipts, birthday cards, random notes from years ago. It was the kind of clutter you never really know what to do with. But as I sat down, I noticed the old address book, the one I hadn't opened in ages. I had no real reason to look at it, no real reason to open it up again. But I did. I found the number for the travel agency, the one I'd used the last time I planned a trip for the family, before I had become the one who stayed behind. I stared at the number for a moment, wondering why I was doing this. But then I remembered the tickets, the ones that had arrived in the mail, the ones that were meant for someone else, the ones I wasn't invited on. I dialed the number slowly, almost hesitating, but then the phone picked up on the other end. The woman's voice was warm, polite, as if she had dealt with people like me before. I could hear the sound of her typing, her fingers dancing across the keys. "I'd like to cancel these tickets," I said, my voice a little stronger than I expected. The pause on the other end was brief, but long enough to make me second-guess myself. "Can I ask why, ma'am?" It was a simple question, but it stung. It stung more than I wanted to admit. I didn't have to explain myself. I wasn't going to justify this decision. It wasn't about them anymore. It was about me. "No," I said, "just cancel them." There was another pause. I heard her fingers on the keyboard, typing in the request. "Of course," she said, her tone polite but distant. I almost wanted to tell her more, but I didn't. I didn't need to. I didn't owe anyone an explanation for wanting to live my life. I wrote down the confirmation number. There, it was done. I had made my decision. I had canceled the tickets. I wasn't going to wait around anymore. I wasn't going to be the one who stayed behind. Not this time. I looked out the window at the garden again, at the roses and the vegetables I had tended to for years. I thought about what I had done. It wasn't much, really. It was just a call, a small thing. But in that small thing, in that small act of rebellion, something shifted. I wasn't invisible anymore. I wasn't someone who waited around, waiting to be needed, waiting to be asked. I was someone who was going to live for herself. And that was enough. I walked to the kitchen, picked up the teapot, and poured myself another cup of tea. I didn't know where I was going yet, but I knew that I was going. I wasn't going to wait to be asked anymore. I wasn't going to be the one who stayed behind. I was going. And for the first time in a long time, that felt good. The next morning, I woke up early, the sun barely peeking over the horizon, casting a soft glow on the trees in the front yard. For the first time in a long while, I felt the rush of possibility in my chest. I wasn't sure where I was going yet. I didn't know how it would happen or if I could even make it happen, but the thought of doing something for myself, of stepping outside the boundaries of what they thought I was capable of, felt like breathing fresh air after being trapped inside too long. I had canceled the tickets. The decision had been made. But that wasn't enough, was it? I needed to take the next step, to prove to myself that I wasn't just watching life happen, waiting for it to come to me. I needed to show myself that I could still be part of it, that I wasn't too old, too invisible, to take up space in the world. I walked into the kitchen, still wrapped in the quiet of the early morning, and made myself a cup of tea. The warmth of it spread through my hands, grounding me, helping me focus. I didn't have much of a plan yet, but there was something stirring inside me, something that felt like a spark. I went to the drawer where I kept my passport, the same one I hadn't opened in years. It was still valid, with a few stamps in it from trips I took with Paul, places we never visited again after he passed. That thought stung for a moment, but I pushed it away. I wasn't going to get stuck there. Not anymore. I stood there for a moment, looking at the passport, then at the window. The roses outside were in full bloom now. It had been years since I'd taken a real vacation, since I'd done anything that wasn't tied to someone else's needs. I'd always been the one to hold things together, the one who made sure everything was taken care of, the one who stayed home when they went away. But this time, I wasn't staying behind. I sat down at the kitchen table, opened the laptop, and stared at the screen for a long time. I didn't know where I was going yet, but I knew it had to be somewhere far enough away that I could forget for a little while, somewhere that wasn't defined by the walls of my house or the roles I'd played for too long. I pulled up a search engine and typed in flights to Athens. I had never been there, never thought about it, but something about it felt right. The idea of walking through the ancient streets, of seeing the blue of the Mediterranean, the sun reflecting off the white buildings. It felt like a dream, but it was a dream I could reach. As I scrolled through the results, I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. I wasn't even sure why it felt so important, but it did. This wasn't just about the trip. It was about taking back control, about showing the world and myself that I wasn't too old for adventure. I wasn't too old to live. I picked a flight. There was a seat available on a flight that left in 2 days. I clicked on it before I could second-guess myself. The cost didn't matter. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about this moment, about not waiting for permission. I clicked the Book Now button. A wave of dizziness washed over me as the confirmation screen popped up. I had done it. I had actually booked a flight. The realization hit me, but it was followed by something else, something deeper. The feeling of freedom. For the first time in years, I felt like I was stepping out of the roles I'd been trapped in. I wasn't just Helen, the mother, the wife, the grandmother who stayed behind. I was Helen, the woman who was going somewhere. I was taking a step for myself, for my own future, no matter how small. I sat there for a few moments, just staring at the screen. It wasn't a grand gesture. I wasn't running away. I wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone but myself. But there was something deeply satisfying about it. Something liberating. The tickets were booked. I was going. The next thing I did was call Carol, the neighbor who had watered the plants while I was at the hospital with Paul, all those years ago. She was the only one who had never treated me like I was invisible. She was kind, always, and when I called her, I could hear the warmth in her voice. "Hey, Carol," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm going away for a little while. Would you mind watering the plants while I'm gone?" Her voice was surprised, but warm. "Sure, hun. Where are you going?" "Just a little trip," I said. "To Greece." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and then a soft laugh. "Well, good for you. I'll take care of things here." I thanked her, and we hung up. It was a small conversation, but it was a necessary one. I wasn't asking for permission. I wasn't explaining why I had made this choice. I was simply telling her, because for once, I wasn't waiting for anyone to understand. I stood up from the table and walked to the closet. I pulled out a suitcase. It wasn't big, just big enough for what I needed. I packed a few things. A pair of comfortable shoes, a scarf I loved, the navy blue dress I hadn't worn in years. It wasn't because I was sad or trying to recreate the past. It was because I remembered how it felt to wear something that made me feel sharp, made me feel alive. I folded the dress carefully, smoothing out the creases. I wasn't packing for a vacation. I was packing for the woman I had forgotten I could be. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't feel the need to. I didn't need their approval, their congratulations. I didn't even need their understanding. I had booked the flight. I was going. And that was all that mattered. By the time evening came, I was ready. I sat on the porch, looking out at the garden one last time before I left. The air was warm, the smell of flowers drifting in the breeze. It was quiet, but it was the kind of quiet that felt peaceful, not empty. Tomorrow, I would leave. Tomorrow, I would be somewhere else. For once, I wasn't staying behind. The night before my flight, I couldn't sleep. I had tossed and turned in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to find a way to calm the thoughts racing through my mind. The house was quiet, as it always was at night, but tonight it felt different. Tonight, I wasn't just lying in bed waiting for the morning to come. Tonight, I was about to do something I'd never done before. I stood up and moved to the window, pulling back the curtain to look out at the street. It was the same view I'd had for years. The same streetlights, the same quiet suburban homes. Nothing had changed, except for me. The breeze was cool against my skin, and I let it wash over me for a moment, trying to steady my breath. Tomorrow, I would be somewhere else, somewhere far away from this house, from all of it. I walked back to the bed and grabbed my suitcase. It was small, just enough to hold the essentials. I had packed the dress, the shoes, the scarf, but there was something else I needed to bring with me, something I couldn't quite put into words. Maybe it was just the idea of freedom, the chance to start over, even if only for a short while. I zipped up the suitcase and sat down on the edge of the bed. I glanced over at the chair where Paul's picture still sat, his smile frozen in time. I hadn't touched it in years. I hadn't moved it, even though I knew I was the only one who ever looked at it anymore. But tonight, it felt different. Tonight, I could almost hear him telling me to go. to take that chance, to live for myself. I reached for the note I had written for Carol, my neighbor. She was the only person who wouldn't question my decision, who wouldn't make me feel like I had to explain. I had kept it simple. Just a few lines saying I was going away for a little while and asking her to water the plants while I was gone. I set it on the kitchen counter where I knew she'd see it. Carol would understand. She always had. The house felt like it was holding its breath, as if it knew that something was changing. I wasn't sure why I was so nervous. I had made this decision for myself, and I wasn't going to back down now. Yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was leaving something behind. Not just the house, but the version of myself that had been here for so long. The woman who waited. The woman who always stayed. I walked to the kitchen and made one last cup of tea. It felt like an old habit, something I did to calm my nerves, to settle my mind. I sipped it slowly, watching the steam rise from the cup, feeling the warmth seep into my hands. It wasn't a big thing. It wasn't a grand gesture. But for me, in this moment, it was enough. It was the calm before the storm, the quiet before the change. I put the teacup down and walked to the door. I stood there for a moment, just looking at the key on the hook by the door. The one I had turned countless times over the years. I knew this house. I knew the sounds it made, the creak of the stairs, the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock in the living room. But tonight I realized I didn't know if I could ever go back to this version of myself. I didn't know if I could ever go back to just watching life happen, waiting for someone to tell me what to do. I grabbed my keys and slid them into my pocket. The weight of them felt different now. They weren't just keys to a house anymore. They were keys to a life that I was ready to leave behind, at least for a little while. I opened the door and stepped outside. The night air was cooler than I expected, but it felt good against my skin. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I had made my choice. I walked down the steps slowly, deliberately, not hurrying, not looking back. I knew this wasn't just about leaving the house. It was about leaving behind the role I had played for too long. The role of the one who stays behind, the one who gets left out, the one who is always the one they can count on, but never the one they bring along. This was the moment when I stopped being that person. This was the moment when I decided that I would no longer wait in the background. I was walking away from that life, even if just for a short while. And that felt like something I hadn't done in years. I locked the door behind me and took one last look at the house. It was just a house, just a place. But for so long, it had been everything. It had been where I stayed, where I cared, where I waited. I couldn't let it be my whole world anymore. I turned and walked down the path, feeling the grass beneath my shoes. I wasn't running away. I wasn't leaving anything behind forever. I was just stepping out into something new, something I hadn't even figured out yet, but something that felt right. I got in the car, started the engine, and pulled out of the driveway. As I drove down the street, I didn't look back. There was no need to. I was going. For the first time in years, I was going, and that was enough. The road ahead was open. It wasn't clear, it wasn't mapped out. But it was mine. It was my road. And I was going to walk it. And as I turned the corner and headed toward the highway, I realized something. For the first time in a long time, I was the one choosing where to go. I was the one deciding what came next. And that felt like freedom. The airport was louder than I remembered. The clatter of wheels on tile floors, the overhead announcements, the hum of voices blending together like a distant buzz. It was almost overwhelming. The noise and movement, like I had stepped into a world that moved too fast for me. And yet I was part of it. I wasn't just a spectator anymore. I was here. I was moving through this world, not on the sidelines, not waiting to be noticed. I stood there for a moment, taking it all in, before I remembered to move. The weight of my suitcase felt heavier than it should, but it wasn't the suitcase that was heavy. It was the moment, the realization that I was doing this, I was really going. It was all so new, so unfamiliar, so different from everything I had ever known. But it felt right. I followed the signs to security, my steps slow but steady. My passport was in my hand, clutched tightly like it was something fragile, something precious. I felt the eyes of the young airport workers as I passed by. At least I imagined they were watching me, an older woman traveling alone. I could almost hear their thoughts. What is she doing here? She's too old for this. Shouldn't she be at home with family? I didn't let their looks bother me. I didn't need their approval. I had stopped needing that a long time ago. They were all so young, so full of energy and possibilities. They couldn't understand. But I wasn't doing this for them. I was doing it for myself. The line at security was long, winding in front of me like a snake, a maze of people, their faces all so familiar in their hurry. But when I stepped forward, the security officer looked at me and smiled. It was a smile of politeness, the kind people give when they're used to seeing someone like me, someone who doesn't belong in this space. I was the older woman, the one who didn't belong in the rush of it all. And I was fine with that. "Enjoy your flight, ma'am," the officer said, and it wasn't said with malice, but with the kind of forced kindness that people give when they're trying to make the moment feel less awkward. I nodded, smiling in return, even though the smile felt strange on my face. I wasn't sure what I was supposed to feel. Grateful, maybe, for being allowed to pass, for being let into the world of people who traveled, who moved, who lived. I walked through the scanner and picked up my bag from the conveyor belt. The movement of my hands automatic, as if I had done this 100 times before. In a way, I had. I had gone through airport security countless times with Paul, with my children, with everyone who had ever traveled with me. I had always been the one in the background, the one who packed the bags, who made sure the kids had their boarding passes ready, who kept everything moving smoothly. But today, I was the one traveling alone, and that felt like a small victory. I followed the signs to my gate, the terminal stretching out before me. The crowd thinned as I walked farther, and the noise quieted a little. I found a seat by the window and sat down, feeling the weight of everything settle into my chest. This was it. I was going. It wasn't just the trip. It was everything that had led up to this moment. The years of waiting, the years of putting everyone else first, the years of being the one who stayed behind. I pulled my phone out of my bag and checked it. Old habits die hard. I had a few messages from my son. Nothing important. He had sent a text asking if I needed anything. A simple check-in. He didn't know. He didn't understand. He hadn't noticed that I was invisible until it was too late. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened my emails and scrolled through them mindlessly, letting the world of other people's demands float by me. But it didn't matter. I wasn't tethered to any of it anymore. I didn't have to reply. I didn't have to explain. I was going to be somewhere else, and that thought was all I needed. A voice over the loudspeaker interrupted my thoughts, announcing the boarding for my flight. I stood up, feeling a rush of nerves again. I hadn't been on a plane in nearly 30 years, and the thought of it stirred something deep in me. What if I wasn't strong enough for this? What if the flight was too much? What if I got there and couldn't manage? But as I walked toward the gate, I reminded myself, you're doing this for you. I wasn't here to be anyone's caretaker, anyone's background character. I wasn't here to simply exist in the shadows of their lives. I was here to live. I handed my boarding pass to the gate agent, who barely looked at me as she scanned it. The young man sitting next to me on the plane didn't look at me either when he sat down. He had his own things to think about, his own life to live. He smiled briefly, then pulled his headphones on, closing himself off to the world. I didn't mind. I wasn't there to be anyone's company. I was there for my own. The plane began to taxi down the runway, and I felt the familiar rumble of the engines, the vibration in my bones. For a moment, I thought of Paul. He had always loved flying. He would have been beside me, holding my hand, telling me everything would be okay. But he wasn't. It was just me. And that, too, felt like something I had to accept. I looked out the window as we ascended. The world below shrinking, the airport fading into the distance. For the first time in so many years, I didn't feel like I was leaving something behind. I felt like I was going towards something, even if I didn't know exactly what it was yet. Maybe I wasn't going to Greece for the sights or the history. Maybe I was going there to find something inside myself that I had lost over the years. The seatbelt sign clicked off, and I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. I closed my eyes for a moment, feeling the gentle rise and fall of the plane, the soft hum of the engines beneath me, the noise of the airport, the rush of people, the questions from my son. All of it seemed so far away now. I wasn't invisible anymore. I was here. I was moving. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. The flight wasn't anything like I remembered. 30 years had passed since the last time I'd boarded a plane, and it felt different now. The whole experience was faster, slicker, more efficient. The seats were smaller, the aisles narrower. It seemed like everything had been compacted into a smaller space, and yet it felt like there was more room to breathe. I think, for the first time in my life, I didn't feel the weight of anyone's expectations pressing down on me. I sat in my aisle seat, looking out the window as the plane soared higher into the sky. The view was breathtaking, the city below growing smaller with each passing second, the ocean stretching out endlessly beyond it. There was something surreal about it, almost like I was in a different world, a world where nothing tethered me to the past. The seat beside me stayed empty until the last moment, and I didn't mind. I wasn't here for anyone else. I was here for me. Then, just as I had started to settle into the quiet hum of the flight, the young man sat down next to me. He was in his 30s, maybe a little younger. He had that tired look people get when they've been working too hard for too long, the kind of look I used to see in Paul's eyes before he got sick. He didn't seem to notice me at first, which was fine. I wasn't here to make small talk. He glanced at me quickly, then turned his attention to the window. His wedding ring caught the light for a second, and I felt a pang of something deep inside, something I couldn't quite name. Maybe it was just the reminder of my own life, of the years I had spent with Paul, of the love we shared. Or maybe it was the thought that I had never thought I would be sitting alone, watching a stranger beside me, wondering how my life had led me to this point. He turned to me after a few moments, his voice polite, almost detached. "Long trip?" he asked, his eyes still focused on the window, his tone more of a curiosity than an actual desire to engage. "Long enough," I replied, offering a small smile. It was the truth, even though I hadn't really meant it that way. But it wasn't just the flight that felt long. It was everything that had led me to this moment. The years of waiting, of being the one who stayed behind, the years of being the person who took care of everyone else, but never took care of herself. The young man nodded, and that was the end of our conversation. He turned back to the window, his head resting against the seat, eyes closing as he settled in. I didn't mind the silence. I welcomed it. It was the kind of silence I hadn't had in so long, the kind where you don't feel the pressure to fill the space with words, with pleasantries. For once, I wasn't the one talking. I wasn't the one explaining myself. I was just here, just existing. I closed my eyes, letting the rhythm of the plane's movement lull me into a light sleep. It wasn't a deep sleep, Not the kind of sleep that comes when you're at peace with yourself. It was the kind of sleep that happens when your body is so exhausted from carrying the weight of years of unspoken words and hidden feelings that it finally gives in. The kind of sleep that keeps grief from turning into anger, keeps it from spilling over and spilling out. When I woke, the plane was flying over the Mediterranean, the endless blue of the sea stretching out below us. I leaned forward in my seat and stared at the horizon. It was beautiful, more beautiful than I had imagined. The light was different here, softer, more forgiving. The world below looked like something out of a dream, the kind of dream I used to have when I was younger, when I believed there was still so much time left to do the things I had always put off. I realized then that I wasn't here just to see the sights, to check off a list of things to do. I wasn't here for a vacation. I was here for something deeper. I was here to prove to myself that I wasn't invisible, that I wasn't just the one who stayed behind, the one who cleaned up everyone else's mess and never asked for anything in return. I was here because I had spent too many years of my life thinking I wasn't worthy of living for myself, thinking that everyone else's needs came before my own. I looked around at the other passengers, some sleeping, some reading, some staring out the window, just like me. We were all going somewhere. But for the first time, I wasn't just a passenger in my own life. I was the one choosing the destination. The young man beside me shifted in his seat, pulling out a book. I glanced at the cover. It was something about world history, some dry academic text. He didn't seem like the type to read novels, the type to dream. He seemed more like someone who read to pass the time, someone who had never really given much thought to what else there was out there beyond the everyday. I couldn't help but wonder about him, about the life he was living, about whether he was happy. But it didn't matter. I wasn't here to think about him. I was here to think about me, to finally ask myself what I wanted, what I needed, without worrying about what anyone else would think. The flight was long, but it passed quickly. I slept off and on, drifting in and out of the kind of rest that doesn't fully settle you, but gives you just enough to keep going. When we hit turbulence, I felt the familiar unease rise in my chest. I had always hated flying, the way it made my stomach lurch and my mind race. But this time, I didn't panic. I didn't clutch the armrest like I used to. Instead, I closed my eyes and let the plane do its thing, just like it had been doing for decades. I wasn't in control of this, and for once, that felt okay. I didn't have to be in control all the time. When I opened my eyes again, the seatbelt light flickered off, and the flight attendants began moving through the cabin, offering drinks, snacks, and the usual nonsense. I watched them for a while, feeling a pang of something I couldn't name. Was it nostalgia, regret, or just the simple realization that I had been in that position once, serving others, making sure everyone else had what they needed? But this time, it was different. This time, I wasn't there to take care of anyone. This time, I was just Helen, a woman who had lived for everyone else for so long, but had finally started living for herself. The plane began its descent toward Athens, and I sat back in my seat, feeling a deep, strange satisfaction. It wasn't about the place I was going or the things I would see. It was about the fact that I had taken a step forward. I had made a choice, and that was enough. As the plane touched down, the noise of the engines faded, and a calm, quiet feeling settled over me. I wasn't just flying into a new city. I was flying into a new chapter of my life, and for the first time in a long time, I was excited to see what came next. When I stepped off the plane and onto the tarmac in Athens, the heat hit me like a wall. It was different from the dry warmth of the house I had left behind, a warmth that clung to the skin and made everything feel alive, in motion. It was almost suffocating at first, but after a few deep breaths, I found that I didn't mind it. The air was thick with the scent of the earth, the kind of scent you only get when you're somewhere old, somewhere that's been touched by centuries of history. I felt small standing in the open, under that vast sky, but also strangely free. I wasn't just walking into another airport, another city. I was walking into something else, something that didn't have the weight of expectations hanging over me. The airport was bustling, alive with the energy of people arriving and leaving. It felt like every person around me had somewhere they needed to be. The sound of luggage wheels rolling across the polished floor, the chatter of voices in different languages, the movement of bodies weaving in and out of each other. It was chaotic, but it was also beautiful. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't moving through it in the background. I wasn't the one staying behind. I was the one moving forward, my own path ahead of me. No one telling me where to go, what to do, or how to feel. I followed the crowd to the baggage claim, my suitcase bumping gently along behind me. I hadn't realized until then just how tight I had been holding it, my fingers wrapped around the handle like it was a lifeline. It was strange how something as simple as a suitcase could feel so symbolic. All the things I needed were packed into that small, worn bag, just the essentials. But somehow, it felt like everything I needed was packed inside me too. I didn't need anyone else's permission to be here. I didn't need anyone else's approval to take up space. I was here, and that was enough. The baggage claim carousel started moving, and I joined the crowd waiting for their bags, scanning the names above us as if they held the key to some secret. I saw tourists, business people, families, each of them caught up in their own worlds. None of them seemed to notice me, and for once, that didn't bother me. It felt like the first time I wasn't invisible. I wasn't just part of the background, just the one who had always been there, waiting. I was someone who could be anywhere, do anything, and that was the freedom I had been craving for years. When my suitcase finally appeared, I grabbed it quickly, as if it might slip away from me if I wasn't fast enough. But it didn't matter. The moment I had been waiting for was here. I wasn't just a passenger in my own life anymore. I was living it. I walked through the doors of the airport and into the bright sunlight of Athens. The heat was different from the kind we had back home. It was dry, sharp, almost overwhelming, but in a way, it made everything feel real. Everything here felt so alive, so full of stories and moments that I had never known. I took a deep breath, trying to absorb it all. The smells, the sounds, the sights. A taxi pulled up and I climbed inside. I gave the driver the address of the pension where I had made a reservation. It wasn't much, just a small, simple place in a side street, but it was enough. I didn't need luxury. I didn't need to stay in a grand hotel with marble floors and room service. I needed to be somewhere that felt real, somewhere that wasn't defined by anyone else's expectations. As we drove through the city, I took in the sights, the hustle of the streets, the crowded markets, the colorful buildings with their faded paint and iron balconies. The city felt old, worn, but beautiful. Like it had been here for centuries, weathered by time but still standing strong, still full of life. It reminded me of me, in a way. I wasn't young anymore. I wasn't who I had been in the past, but I wasn't finished either. I still had stories to live, places to go, things to see. The taxi driver spoke in broken English, pointing out landmarks and telling me things I could hardly understand. But I didn't mind. I wasn't in a hurry to get to the pension. I wasn't in a hurry for anything. For the first time in years, I had nowhere to be. I wasn't waiting for anyone else. I was just here, moving through this city, through this world, and that felt like a luxury. We reached my destination, and the taxi driver helped me with my suitcase, pointing to the door of the pension. I thanked him, and he waved as he drove off. I stood there for a moment, looking at the small, modest building. It wasn't much, but it was mine, for however long I wanted it to be. I was here. I was free. The woman at the desk spoke English, and she smiled when she saw me. She handed me the key to my room with a polite, almost distant, "Welcome, madam." There was something in her smile that reminded me of the polite smiles I had received back home, the ones that didn't really mean anything. But it didn't bother me. I wasn't here to make friends. I was here to make space for myself, to live for myself. I walked up to my room, and when I stepped inside, I felt the silence wrap around me. The room was small, simply furnished, with an old bed, a chair, and a small window that looked out onto a narrow street. It wasn't fancy, but it was perfect. It was exactly what I needed. I set my suitcase down and stood by the window for a moment, looking out at the street. The sounds of the city drifted up to me. Voices, footsteps, the occasional car passing by. It was all so different, so new. But for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was out of place. I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. I sat on the bed for a moment, not knowing what to do next. I had no plan, no agenda. I wasn't trying to see everything, to tick off a list of things I had to do. I was here for the feeling of it, for the chance to breathe without waiting for someone else's permission. I had arrived. I was here, and in that moment, that was enough. The morning sun in Athens felt different from the one back home. It wasn't just the light, which had a kind of gold to it, softer than the harsh, bright sun of my own neighborhood. It was the air, the way it wrapped around me, heavy with history, with age, with a world that had seen more than I ever would. The whole city felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for something. I didn't know what that something was, but I knew I was here to find it. I woke up before the alarm went off, just as the city began to stir. The sounds of the streets seeped in through the window, faint murmurs of life beginning, distant conversations, the hum of a world that never truly stopped. The bed was small and simple, but it was comfortable, and the room smelled faintly of lavender and dust, like something that had been here for a while, untouched by time. For a moment, I just lay there, feeling the weight of my own body in this strange place. It wasn't uncomfortable, not at all, but it was new. I hadn't slept alone in a bed in a place that wasn't my own for years. I hadn't been in a space like this for so long, a space that wasn't defined by anyone else. No one else's needs, no one else's schedule. Just me, alone, in a city that was full of stories I had yet to uncover. The thought felt strange, yet liberating. The silence was mine. The time was mine. I didn't have to answer to anyone or anything. I got up, walked over to the window, and pushed back the curtains. The streets were still quiet, just a few people walking by, some early risers on their way to work, others heading to the market. I couldn't tell if they were locals or tourists, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I needed to know. They were just people, just like me, moving through the world in their own way, in their own time. I made my way to the small bathroom and washed my face. The water was cold, sharp against my skin, and I felt it wake me up in a way that the coffee I hadn't yet made never could. It was the kind of cold that reminded you that you were alive, that you were still here, that you had a purpose. It felt like a small act of rebellion against the years of apathy I had allowed myself to fall into. I wasn't waiting for life anymore. I was living it. After I dressed, I stood in front of the mirror and looked at myself. I hadn't worn makeup in years, but I did it anyway this morning. Just a little. A dab of lipstick, a swipe of mascara. Just enough to make me feel like I had control over my own image. There was no one to impress, no one to care, but I needed to feel like I mattered. For once, I didn't just want to blend into the background. I wanted to be seen, and I was starting with myself. I walked downstairs to the small dining area where a woman, who must have been in her 60s, was setting out breakfast. She smiled at me as I walked in, a warm, welcoming smile that felt genuine. She didn't ask me what I wanted or what I'd like to do today. She simply handed me a plate of bread, olives, and fruit, the kind of breakfast that seemed as old as the city itself. There was something about it that felt comforting, something about it that made me feel like I had stepped into a life I was meant to live. A life where I didn't have to ask permission. A life where I could just exist, just be. I sat at the table by the window, looking out at the street. The world was slowly waking up, and it felt like I was watching it unfold for the first time. I ate slowly, savoring each bite, not rushing. There was no need to hurry anymore. I didn't have to be anywhere, and the thought of that was both terrifying and exhilarating. The freedom was overwhelming, but in a way that made me feel light, like I could finally breathe without feeling like I was suffocating. I had spent so many years taking care of everyone else, making sure they were happy, making sure their needs were met, making sure I was always there when they needed me. But now I had no one to take care of but myself. The thought of that had terrified me when I first booked the trip. What would I do without my role? What would I do without being needed? But now, sitting here in this small room in Athens, I felt something shift. I was needed. I was important. And for the first time in years, I was the one who mattered most. After breakfast, I decided to take a walk through the neighborhood. I had no particular destination in mind, no itinerary. I just wanted to be outside, to feel the city beneath my feet. I had always prided myself on knowing every inch of my own neighborhood, the familiar paths, the shortcuts, the places where I could go without thinking. But here, in Athens, everything was new. Every street, every corner, every building had a story to tell. And for once, I didn't feel the need to rush past them. I wanted to hear them. I wandered through narrow streets lined with old buildings, their facades chipped and faded, each one with a story I would never know. The heat was starting to rise, but it didn't bother me. The air felt different here, softer, more welcoming. The sound of church bells chimed in the distance, mixing with the faint hum of conversation in the cafes. I walked slowly, not caring about the time, not caring about the destination. I passed a small bakery with fresh bread stacked outside, the smell of it drifting through the air. I bought a piece, savoring the crunch as I bit into it. The bread was warm, fresh, and simple, and it tasted like something I hadn't had in years. I hadn't realized how much I missed the simple pleasures until I was here, in this place where nothing rushed. The city, with all its chaos, moved at its own pace, and for once, I was moving with it. I walked until my feet ached, not wanting to stop, not wanting to leave this city that was becoming part of me. I sat on a bench, the sun warm on my face, and I let the moment wash over me. There were no expectations here, no demands, no pressure, just me, in this moment, feeling alive for the first time in a long time. And that, I realized, was enough. Just being here, just being me. I had only been in Athens for a few days when I first met Rosalie. It wasn't a moment I had planned for. I wasn't looking for company. I wasn't searching for a friend. But that's the thing about life. It doesn't always ask if you're ready for what it's about to throw your way. It just happens. It was a quiet morning, the kind where the sun has just risen and the streets are still sleepy, still warm with the promise of a new day. I had been wandering the city again, taking my time as I always did now, moving through narrow alleys and quiet squares, stopping to admire the little things that no one else seemed to notice, the cracked tile of an old building, the flower pots spilling over with ivy, the sound of footsteps echoing off the stone streets. I had gone into a small cafe, one of those hidden places where the locals gather for their morning coffee, and ordered a small cup of black coffee, as I had been doing every morning since I arrived. I wasn't sure why I kept coming back to the same spot. Maybe it was the comforting smell of freshly ground beans, or maybe it was the way the cafe seemed to slow the world down around me, the way I could sit there for hours and just watch life unfold without being part of it. I had just taken my first sip of coffee when I noticed her. She was sitting at the table next to mine, reading a book. She had silver hair, tied back into a neat bun, and a pair of half-moon glasses perched on the tip of her nose. Her face was lined with age, but there was something about her, Something in the way she held herself, in the way she looked at the world, that made her seem much younger than her years. She didn't seem like someone who had given up. She didn't seem like someone who had stopped living. I must have stared a little too long, because she looked up from her book and caught my gaze. For a moment, I felt embarrassed, like I had been caught doing something I wasn't supposed to. But she just smiled, a soft, knowing smile, as if she could see something in me that I hadn't even figured out yet. "You're not from around here, are you?" she asked, her voice smooth, with just a hint of an accent that I couldn't quite place. I shook my head, surprised by the question. "No," I said. "I'm from the States. Just here for a little while." She nodded, taking off her glasses and setting them down on the table. "I could tell," she said, smiling again. "There's a certain look you get when you're not used to the heat. You're either from somewhere colder or you're just passing through." I chuckled, feeling a little self-conscious. She didn't seem to mind. "You're right," I said. "I'm not used to it. But I'm getting used to it." "You'll be fine," she said, with that same quiet confidence. "We all get used to it eventually. You just have to stop fighting it and let the heat in." There was something about her, something in her voice that made me want to stay, to listen, to understand. I had spent so many years living a life where I had to take care of everyone else, where I had to be something for someone else. But this woman, this stranger, was offering me something I didn't even know I needed. She wasn't offering advice or comfort. She was just offering presence. I didn't know it then, but it was the beginning of something I couldn't have planned for, no matter how much I tried. "I'm Rosalie," she said, after a moment of silence, as if she was waiting for me to speak first. "Retired school principal. From Lyon." I told her my name, and we spent the next few minutes talking about nothing in particular. The weather, the coffee, the way the city felt. Small talk, but in that moment, it was everything. There was a certain ease to the conversation, something simple and uncomplicated. It was like talking to someone I had known for years, someone who understood without needing an explanation. As we spoke, I found myself telling her more than I had planned to, about my family, about why I was here, about the way my son and daughter-in-law had treated me like I was too old to travel, too old to do anything except stay behind and take care of the house. I told her how I had come to Greece, not for the beaches or the ruins, but to prove to myself that I wasn't just an afterthought in my own life. Rosalie didn't interrupt. She didn't offer me sympathy or try to make me feel better. She just listened. And in that moment, I realized that I hadn't really been listened to in years. Not truly. Not in the way she was listening to me. "I've been there," she said after I finished speaking. "The part where you feel like you're just waiting. Like you've been forgotten. Like no one really sees you anymore." I looked at her, surprised. "You?" She nodded, her eyes softening. "I was a teacher for years, spent my life giving everything to my students, to my family. And when it was all over, when I retired and the house was empty, I realized something. I had been giving so much of myself to everyone else that I had forgotten what I wanted. I'd forgotten what it meant to live for myself." Her words hung in the air between us, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was alone. She had lived it. She knew what it felt like to fade into the background, to become nothing more than a caretaker, a shadow. And yet here she was, sitting across from me, smiling as if she had found her way back to herself. "Sometimes you have to go somewhere new," Rosalie continued, "not because you want to escape, but because you need to remember who you are. You need to find yourself again." I felt the weight of her words sink in. It was as if she had reached right inside me, taken my hidden fears and insecurities, and laid them bare in the open for both of us to see. She wasn't telling me to do anything. She wasn't telling me how to live my life. She was just there, showing me that it was okay to step outside the role I had always played. "I think you've already found yourself," Rosalie said, her voice warm and sure. You just need to believe it. I sat back in my chair, feeling something shift in me. I wasn't sure what it was yet, but I knew it was important. It felt like a door had opened in my chest, and I was just beginning to step through it. From that moment on, I spent more time with Rosalie. We walked the streets together, stopping at small shops, sharing meals, and talking about everything and nothing. She was the kind of woman who noticed the little things, the cracks in the walls of a building, the flowers growing out of the cracks, the way the light filtered through the trees. She didn't rush. She didn't try to capture every moment for later. She just lived in each moment like it was enough. And for the first time in so long, I found myself doing the same. I wasn't just passing through Athens anymore. I was living in it, and I was living for me. It had been a week since I'd arrived in Athens, a week of wandering through streets I had never imagined walking, a week of meeting new people, tasting new foods, and most importantly, a week of just being. Being without the constant hum of responsibility. Being without the weight of expectations. It was liberating in a way I hadn't expected. But as the days went by, a thought started to creep into my mind. One that I couldn't ignore. What would happen when I went back? Would I fall right back into the same role I had been playing for so long? The one I had escaped from for a brief moment in time? Or would this trip, this act of living for myself, be the beginning of something more? The sun was setting, casting an orange glow across the buildings when my phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number. I hesitated for a moment, wondering who it might be. Maybe one of the places I had visited, or perhaps something to do with the travel arrangements I had made. I was far from home, but still tethered to it in ways I wasn't quite ready to let go of. I swiped to answer. Helen? It was David, my son. His voice sounded strained, almost like he was holding something back. Mom, where are you? I took a deep breath, the question catching me off guard. The timing felt wrong, as if I wasn't ready for this conversation. Not yet. I'm in Athens, I replied softly, my words carrying the weight of the decision I had made to come here, to leave behind everything I had known. I'm still here. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, a silence that stretched between us, thick with unsaid words. The air around me felt heavier as I waited for him to speak. It was strange to hear his voice, after so many days of silence, so many weeks of feeling disconnected, like I was no longer a part of the family I had always been a central figure in. Athens, David repeated, like he was trying to process the information. Mom, we thought you were just upset, that this was some kind of rebellion or something. I didn't know you were serious about leaving. His words stung, even though I didn't want them to. Serious about leaving, I repeated. What do you mean? David sighed, and I could almost hear the tiredness in his voice. We thought this was just a phase, Mom. We didn't think you were really going to do this. Leave, alone, without telling anyone, without asking us. You don't even know how worried we've been. The words hit harder than I expected. I had been so focused on the freedom I felt here, the space I had carved out for myself, that I hadn't stopped to consider how my leaving might affect them. To be honest, I didn't know if I cared, or maybe I did care, but I just needed to be free of the roles I had played for so long, of being the one who always stayed behind. I didn't ask you, I said quietly, trying to find the right words, because I didn't need permission. I didn't ask you because I had to do this for me, David. For once, I had to do something for myself, something that wasn't about anyone else. I'm not a babysitter, not a maid, not just the one who stays behind anymore. Another long pause. This time, it wasn't uncomfortable. It was necessary. The words I had said, the words I had needed to say, hung in the air between us. I could feel the shift, feel the weight of what I had been carrying for years, finally being put into words, finally being acknowledged. I didn't mean to hurt you, I added softly, but you've stopped seeing me. Really seeing me. You and Laura. You've stopped asking what I want, what I need, and I didn't know how else to make you see it. The silence on the other end of the line stretched again, and I wondered if he would respond, if he even could. I wasn't sure if this conversation would ever lead anywhere, but I knew one thing: I wasn't going to back down. Not this time. I don't know what to say, Mom, David said after a long time. We've been busy. You know how it is, and Amelia's been so difficult lately. I guess I thought you'd be fine. I thought you were okay with it. I didn't think you'd leave. I felt a pang of sadness mixed with something else, maybe regret, maybe the beginnings of understanding. I've been fine for a long time, David. I've been fine on the outside, at least. I've been the one who takes care of everything, who makes sure everyone else is okay. But no one ever asks if I'm okay. No one asks if I want to be a part of their plans. They just tell me what I should be doing, and I'm tired of it. I'm tired of being invisible. Another pause. But this one felt different. It wasn't awkward. It wasn't the uncomfortable silence of a conversation that couldn't move forward. It was the silence of someone trying to understand, trying to find the words to respond. For once, I wasn't the one filling the gaps. For once, I was the one waiting for someone else to catch up. I never wanted you to feel invisible, David said finally, his voice quieter now. But I get it, Mom. I see it now. I've been so wrapped up in everything that I didn't see what I was doing. I didn't see that I was pushing you away. I thought you'd just stay, like you always do. His words, though simple, were enough. Enough to show that maybe there was still something left to fix. Maybe I hadn't completely lost them. Maybe this trip, this time I had taken for myself, had given them a chance to see me again. Not as someone to take care of, not as the one who stayed behind, but as a person. I'm sorry, David continued. I know I've taken you for granted. I'll do better. I'll make it right. I closed my eyes, letting his words wash over me. They weren't perfect. They weren't enough to undo the years of feeling unseen, but they were a start. And for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to hope. I'm not angry, David, I said, my voice soft but firm. I just needed you to see me. To see that I'm not just your mom. I'm still me too. The call ended soon after that, and as I sat there in the small pension room, staring at the phone in my hand, I felt a mix of emotions I couldn't quite name. Relief, maybe, or maybe it was the start of something new, a chance to finally be seen, to finally be heard. I didn't know what would happen when I went back, but for the first time in a long while, I wasn't afraid of it, because when I returned, I would be different. I would be more than the role they had assigned me. I would be Helen again, and that was enough. I woke up early the next morning, the sun already peeking over the horizon, casting a soft golden light across the small room in Athens. The light felt different here, softer, more forgiving. It wasn't the harsh light of routine, of obligations, of a life lived in someone else's shadow. This light felt like the beginning of something, like the promise of a new chapter unfolding. I hadn't expected it, but in this moment, I realized that this trip wasn't just about escaping. It was about reclaiming what had always been mine, me. As I sat on the edge of the bed, I thought back to the call with David, to the words he had said, the ones I had needed to hear but had never expected. I wasn't sure how to feel about it. It wasn't an apology I had wanted. It wasn't a grand gesture of love or regret. But it was enough to make me realize that maybe there was hope, that maybe, just maybe, I hadn't been forgotten forever. But hope didn't mean I could go back to what I had been. It didn't mean I could slide back into the role I had played for years. The one where I was the one who always stayed behind, always sacrificed, always put everyone else first. I couldn't do that anymore. Not after everything I had learned here. Not after the freedom I had tasted in these few short days. I walked over to the window, pushing the curtains aside to let the soft morning light fill the room. The streets outside were already coming to life, the early risers on their way to work, the vendors setting up their carts. The city felt awake, alive, full of possibility. I had always heard that Athens was a city of history, of ancient ruins and stories told by the stones themselves. But in that moment, I realized it was more than that. It was a city of rebirth, of new beginnings, and for the first time in years, I could feel it deep in my bones. I had spent too many years being the one who stayed behind. Too many years waiting for the approval of others, for someone to finally ask me what I wanted, what I needed. But that was over now. The life I had known, the life I had allowed myself to be trapped in, was something I could leave behind. I didn't need to stay there anymore. I didn't need to wait for permission to live. I could live for myself. And that was the most radical thing I could do. I dressed slowly, taking my time, as if the act of putting on my clothes was more than just getting ready for the day. It was a ritual, a small act of reclaiming myself. I slipped into a simple dress, the navy one I had packed in my suitcase, the one I had worn for years but hadn't had the courage to wear since Paul's funeral. It had always felt like a dress for another life, a life before grief had settled in, before the years of waiting had worn me down. But today, I put it on, and it didn't feel like a reminder of what I had lost. It felt like a declaration of what I was ready to gain. I stood in front of the mirror for a moment, adjusting the fabric, smoothing the creases. There was a quiet strength in the way the dress hugged my body, a quiet affirmation that I was still here, still me. I wasn't just the woman who had always stayed behind. I wasn't just the one who had taken care of everything. I was Helen. I was more than the sum of the roles I had played. And today, I was going to prove that to myself. I left the room and headed downstairs to the small dining area. The woman who had served me breakfast the day before was already there, setting out the usual spread. It was simple: a loaf of fresh bread, a bowl of olives, some fruit. It was the kind of breakfast I had always enjoyed, but never truly savored. Today, though, I took my time. I tasted each bite, savoring the textures, the flavors, the way the bread melted in my mouth, the way the olives were salty but rich, like the earth itself had made them just for me. The morning felt full, like a promise I didn't want to break. I had made the decision to move forward, and with each passing moment, I felt the weight of my old life lifting from my shoulders, piece by piece. As I finished my breakfast, I realized that I wasn't sure what came next. I didn't know if I would ever fully reconcile with David or my daughter-in-law, Laura. I didn't know if they would ever see me for who I really was, but that was no longer my concern. My concern was me. My concern was living my life on my terms, without waiting for anyone else to tell me that I had permission to do so. I paid the bill at the front desk and left the cafe, stepping out into the streets of Athens once again. The sun was higher now, casting its golden glow over the city. I walked slowly, letting the rhythm of the city wash over me. I passed by the familiar sights, the old stone buildings, the vibrant market stalls, the people moving about their day with purpose, with energy. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was just a visitor. I felt like I belonged here, even if only for this short time. I wasn't running away. I wasn't escaping from my past. I was simply moving forward, and that was enough. As I walked, I thought about Rosalie, the way she had shown me how to live in the moment, how to pay attention to the small things, the cracks in the walls, the way the light hit the leaves, the sound of birds singing in the trees. I had spent so many years focused on the big picture, on the things I thought mattered, being the one who took care of everything, who was always available, who always made sure the house was in order. But I had forgotten how to live in the moment, how to breathe in each moment as it came. And that was what I had found here. I had found the ability to just be. Not to be someone's mother or grandmother or caretaker, but to be Helen. A woman with a life to live, a woman who deserved to take up space, a woman who didn't have to explain her choices to anyone. I walked through the streets, the sound of my footsteps blending with the city's pulse. I was moving forward, and for the first time in a long time, that didn't scare me. It felt like freedom. And for the first time in years, I didn't look back. The days in Athens had begun to blend into one another, each one a quiet unfolding of moments that I could barely hold on to before they slipped away. But it was in these fleeting, soft moments that I found something that I didn't even know I had been missing, the ability to be still, to simply exist without the weight of the world on my shoulders. I spent the next few days wandering. No agenda, no rush. I walked through the ancient streets, sometimes just to get lost, other times to find something new. The city had a rhythm to it, a pulse that I could feel in my own chest as I moved through it. There was something both timeless and immediate about Athens, its ruins and ancient buildings standing tall, surrounded by the hum of modern life. It was a city where the past never truly left, where history wasn't a separate thing, but part of the fabric of everyday existence. And I felt that in a way that was hard to describe. It was on one of these quiet walks that I realized I was no longer waiting for anything, no longer waiting for anyone to tell me what to do, where to go, or how to live. I wasn't sitting on the sidelines of my own life anymore. I was living it, fully and without reservation. And in that realization, I felt a peace that I hadn't known in so long. As I passed by a small cafe on one of the quieter streets, I noticed a woman sitting at a table outside, sipping coffee alone. She had the same quiet confidence that Rosalie had, a kind of presence that filled the space without demanding attention. I recognized something in her, something I had been searching for in myself. She was older than I was, her hair a shade of silver, but her eyes held the same spark I had seen in Rosalie's. It was the kind of spark that told you she had lived, had loved, had lost, and had come out on the other side. She didn't look back. She simply was. I found myself walking toward her, my feet moving on their own. She looked up just as I reached the table, her gaze steady but not invasive. "Mind if I sit?" I asked before I even thought about it. She smiled, her eyes softening. "Not at all," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her. I sat down, feeling an immediate sense of ease settle over me. It wasn't like the kind of conversation I had always been used to, one where I had to fill the silence with words, to explain myself, to keep everything flowing. With this woman, the silence wasn't uncomfortable. It wasn't something to be avoided. It just was, and that was enough. We didn't speak for a moment. Just sat there, watching the world go by. The noise of the city seemed distant, muffled by the space between us. It felt as though the world had paused for this brief exchange, as though the city was giving us a moment to breathe. After a while, I looked up at her again, feeling the pull to speak. "I'm sorry to disturb you," I began, "but I've been traveling for a while now. I've spent so much of my life waiting for others, waiting to be seen. And I realized something. I've forgotten how to just be." She looked at me for a long moment, her gaze steady and knowing, as if she had seen this struggle before, in herself, in others. "It's easy to forget," she said softly. "Life has a way of making us feel like we're just supposed to keep moving, keep doing, keep caring for everyone but ourselves. But that's not living, is it?" I shook my head, feeling the truth of her words settle in my chest like a weight that had been there for too long. finally being lifted. "No," I said quietly. "It isn't." The woman smiled, but it wasn't a smile of sympathy. It was the smile of someone who had lived and understood what it meant to wake up one day and realize that you had given everything to everyone else, only to realize you didn't know who you were anymore. She had that same knowing expression that Rosalie had, like she understood the ache of a life lived quietly in the background, of being the one who stayed behind. "Sometimes it takes stepping away," she said. "Sometimes you have to leave everything behind, even for just a little while, to remember who you are, not who everyone else expects you to be, just who you are." I sat there, absorbing her words, feeling them settle deep inside me, like pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. This was what I had been searching for all along, not answers, not resolutions, but a sense of permission to be who I was, without apology, without explanation. "I've spent so much of my life thinking that my worth was in what I could do for others," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I thought if I just kept giving, kept making sure everything was in order, then maybe I'd be needed. But now, I don't know." She nodded slowly, as if she understood exactly what I meant. "It's not about being needed, is it?" she asked. "It's about being seen. About being able to sit in your own space, with your own thoughts, without feeling like you have to explain why you exist. That's where true freedom is." Her words sank in, heavy and comforting all at once. For so long, I had lived with the belief that my worth was tied to how much I could give, to how much I could take care of. But now, sitting across from this woman who seemed so at peace with herself, I began to understand that my worth wasn't in what I did for others. It was in who I was, in simply existing without needing anyone else's validation. "I think I'm starting to see that," I said, the words coming out more clearly than I expected. "I think I'm starting to see who I am." She smiled again, this time with a kind of approval, but not the kind that feels earned or deserved. It was simply a smile of recognition, as if she saw the same thing in me that I was beginning to see in myself. "Well then," she said, standing up slowly, "I suppose I've said all I needed to say." "You've got it, dear. You're on your way." With that, she turned and walked away, blending into the crowd like she was just another person going about their day. And in that moment, I realized something. She hadn't given me advice or fixed anything. She had simply shared a truth with me, a truth that I had to learn on my own, at my own pace. I sat there for a long time, watching her disappear into the distance, feeling like something had shifted inside me. The silence between us had been more than just a pause. It had been a quiet understanding, a reminder that sometimes the most profound connections don't need words. I wasn't sure where this journey would lead, but I knew one thing. I wasn't walking it for anyone else anymore. I was walking it for me, and for the first time in so long, that felt like enough. I spent the next few days in Athens like I was moving through someone else's life, watching it unfold from the outside. It wasn't that I felt detached. It was just that everything felt so new, so different from the life I had left behind. Each moment was a little victory, a small rebellion against the person I had been, against the woman who had spent too many years quietly waiting, quietly accepting what others expected of her. But even in this new life, I was beginning to carve out for myself. There was a stillness inside, a quiet ache that I couldn't shake. It wasn't loneliness exactly. I had been alone for so long, even when I was surrounded by people. It was more the feeling of a life half-lived, of so much unsaid, so much undone, that I had started to believe I didn't have a voice anymore. It wasn't the loud, angry kind of silence. It was the quiet kind. The kind that comes when you stop asking for what you need. When you stop speaking up because you've convinced yourself that no one is listening anyway. But now, here in Athens, something was shifting. It was subtle at first, like a door slowly creaking open. The smallest hint of light filtering through a crack. The more I wandered the city, the more I realized that I wasn't just running away from my old life. I wasn't just escaping the expectations that had weighed me down for so long. I was finding the part of me that I had buried, the part of me that had learned to stay quiet, to not make waves, to not demand attention. And that part of me, Helen, was beginning to wake up. It was on the fourth day when I found myself walking through the streets again, with no real destination in mind, that it hit me. I had been letting the world tell me who I was for too long, and I had been listening. I had been letting their words shape me, their silence, their disapproval, their indifference. But here, in this city, this ancient city that had seen more than I could ever comprehend, I realized I was still Helen. I was still the woman who had dreams, who had things to say, things to express, things that had been buried under years of silence, and it was time to speak them. I had spent so much of my life tiptoeing around people, around their needs, their feelings, always making sure I was the one who didn't cause trouble, the one who didn't ask for too much. I was the one who stayed behind, the one who was always available, always accommodating, always just there. I had let my voice grow quieter with each passing year, until I didn't even know what I had to say anymore. And it scared me. It terrified me to think that I had lost myself in the service of others, that I had let them take so much of me that I had nothing left for myself. But I wasn't that woman anymore. I wasn't the quiet one who waited for permission. I wasn't the one who was content to fade into the background. I had something to say, and it was time to find the words. I decided to go to a cafe that afternoon. One I had passed several times but had never entered. It was small and tucked away, just a few blocks from my pension, but there was something about it that called to me. It was old, its windows fogged with age, the air inside warm and rich with the scent of coffee and baked bread. I walked in, the bell above the door chiming softly, and the moment I stepped inside, I felt a shift. It wasn't a dramatic moment. It wasn't a grand revelation, but it felt significant. I found a seat by the window, ordered a coffee, and sat back, letting the noise of the city outside fade away. The people inside the cafe were absorbed in their own conversations, their own lives, and for the first time, I didn't feel the urge to interrupt or to fit in. I didn't need to make myself visible to feel important. I just wanted to be, and that, I realized, was the most powerful thing I could do. As I sat there, sipping my coffee, I couldn't help but think of the phone call I had had with David. His voice still echoed in my mind. "I didn't know you were serious about leaving. I didn't think you would really do it." There was a time when that would have crushed me, when I would have apologized for making them uncomfortable, for disrupting the order of things. But I wasn't going to do that anymore. I wasn't going to apologize for living my life the way I wanted to. I wasn't going to shrink myself to fit into a space that wasn't meant for me. I pulled out a small notebook from my bag, one I had brought with me for the trip but hadn't opened until now. And I began to write. At first, the words came slowly, tentatively, like they were unsure of themselves. But then, as I kept writing, they flowed more freely. It was as if my hand had finally found the rhythm it had been missing for so long. I wrote about the way I had felt for years, the way I had allowed myself to be invisible, to fade into the background of my own life. I wrote about the things I had kept inside, the dreams I had forgotten to pursue, the parts of me I had buried because I was too afraid to speak up. I wrote about the silence that had become so familiar to me, and how it had become both my prison and my refuge. I had spent so many years telling myself that it was easier to stay quiet, that it was safer to keep my thoughts and feelings to myself. But now I knew that silence wasn't safety. It was a lie, and it was time to break it. As the words flowed onto the page, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, a pressure I hadn't realized was there until it was gone. Writing had always been a way for me to express myself, but it had been years since I had written anything that mattered. Today, I was writing for me, not for anyone else. I was reclaiming my voice, one word at a time. By the time I finished my coffee, I had filled several pages with thoughts and reflections, with the beginnings of something I hadn't even realized I needed until now. I looked down at the pages, at the words I had written, and felt a quiet sense of pride. I hadn't just come to Athens to see the sights. I had come here to find myself again. And in this small cafe, sitting by the window with the world outside moving on without me, I had done just that. I closed the notebook and put it back in my bag, a small smile on my face. I had found my voice again, and I knew now that I wasn't going to let it go. I stood up, paid for my coffee, and walked back into the streets of Athens. The sun was higher now, the heat of the day beginning to settle in, but it didn't bother me. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was ready to speak, ready to be heard, and most of all, ready to live. The world had been waiting for me to find my voice, and I was finally ready to give it to them. When I landed back home, the first thing I noticed was the quiet. The airport wasn't crowded like the one in Athens, and the faces around me seemed familiar. Too familiar. They were the same faces I had left behind, the same routines that I had walked away from, but somehow everything felt different. The world here, my world, was still the same, yet I wasn't. I walked through the terminal, my steps slower than they had been in Athens, the weight of the return settling over me like a blanket. I wasn't sure what I expected. Maybe that things would have changed while I was gone, that my family would have learned something from my absence, that they would have realized how much I had given up, how much I had been waiting for something more. But I knew deep down that nothing had really changed. People don't change because you take a trip. They change when they decide to change. As I made my way to the baggage claim, I couldn't help but feel the pressure of the silence building inside me. The world around me felt like it was in fast forward while I was still stuck in the slow motion of my own thoughts. I was here. I was back. But I wasn't the same. I had seen too much, felt too much to go back to the way things were, and that was the hardest part. I didn't know if they would see me as I was now, if they would see me at all. I had learned so much in Athens, but the hardest lesson, the one that kept lingering, was the realization that my family, my son, my daughter-in-law, had stopped truly seeing me a long time ago. They had stopped asking me who I was, stopped wondering if I was okay, if I needed something for myself. They had come to see me as a background figure, a caretaker, a fixture, and maybe I had let them, but I wouldn't anymore. I grabbed my suitcase when it finally appeared on the carousel. The same suitcase I had dragged across the cobblestone streets of Athens, across the busy terminals, the one I had packed so carefully, full of the things I thought I'd need for this adventure. The weight of it felt different now, heavier. It wasn't the physical weight, but the weight of the life I had returned to, a life that wasn't quite mine anymore, a life that had been put on hold while I had tried to figure out who I was without everyone else's needs taking precedence. The ride home was longer than I remembered. Maybe it was the quiet. Maybe it was the way the streets had all looked the same, as if time hadn't passed while I had been away. The familiar sights, the grocery store, the park where I used to walk with Amelia, the corner cafe where I would sit and read, seemed foreign to me now, as though I had been away much longer than just a few weeks. The small things that had once been comforting felt suffocating. I had spent so many years moving through these streets, through this life, without ever really being here. I had been a part of the background, part of the routine, and now I was back. But I wasn't sure where I fit in anymore. When I arrived at the house, I felt an overwhelming sense of déjà vu. The door creaked open just as it always had. The smell of the house, coffee, old wood, the faint hint of something floral, was the same. The furniture, the pictures on the wall, the rug by the door, all of it was as it had always been. But it didn't feel like my house anymore. It felt like a house I had once lived in, a house where I had once been the center of everything. But now, standing in the doorway, I felt like a visitor. I set my suitcase down and looked around, unsure of what to do next. Everything was just as I had left it, but nothing felt the same. It wasn't the house that had changed. It was me. I had spent so many years here, so many years living in this space, and yet I had never really felt at home in it. I had always been waiting for someone to see me, waiting for someone to ask if I needed something, waiting for a seat at the table. But now, I didn't need permission anymore. I had learned that in Athens. I didn't need their approval to be who I was. I walked into the living room where the photo of Paul still sat on the mantel, his smiling face frozen in time. I had kept that photo there, untouched, for years, a symbol of the life we had shared, the love we had built. But now, looking at it, I felt a pang of something I couldn't name. Nostalgia, yes, but also a feeling of being stuck. I had spent so many years holding on to the past, holding on to who I had been, that I had forgotten how to move forward. I sat down on the couch, my hands resting in my lap. I had made the decision to change, to live for myself, to finally find my voice. But sitting in this familiar room, in this house that had once been my world, I wasn't sure how to begin. How do you come back from something like this? How do you return to a life that no longer fits? The silence in the house was suffocating. It wasn't the silence of peace, it was the silence of distance, of things unsaid, of years spent in a life that I had simply endured rather than lived. And in that silence, I realized something. I couldn't go back to what it was. I couldn't slip back into the role I had always played, the one that had been so easy to fall into. I stood up and walked to the kitchen, my footsteps echoing in the empty space. The familiar hum of the refrigerator, the clink of dishes in the cupboard, it all felt too normal, too comfortable. I opened the cupboard and pulled out a cup, staring at it for a long moment. I could make tea just like I always had, just like I used to do when things felt unsettled. But today, the thought of making tea felt like a reminder of everything I had done for everyone else, a reminder of the woman who had spent too many years waiting for someone to ask her to live. I set the cup down and turned to face the room. I wasn't sure what I was waiting for, but I knew this wasn't it. I couldn't stay in this quiet space, in this house that felt like a tomb for my old self. I had left to find something more, something I hadn't even known I was looking for. And now I had to live it. The house wasn't my home anymore. I was my home, and wherever I went, whatever I did, I would carry that with me. I wasn't sure what came next, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't waiting anymore. I wasn't waiting for permission. I wasn't waiting for anyone to tell me who I was or where I belonged. I was moving forward, one step at a time, on my own terms. I picked up my suitcase, the weight of it no longer feeling burdensome, but empowering. I wasn't just carrying my belongings, I was carrying my future, and for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to leave the past behind and start again, ready to be Helen, once and for all.